In this section, we are going to learn the basics of Alpine JS. We will cover what Alpine JS is, its core feature, where it should be used, what are the directives, and what states means in Alpine JS. We will create a few small projects that will be useful in our Shopify theme development. By the end of this video, you will clearly understand how Alpine JS works internally. Alpine JS is a JavaScript framework known for its simplicity and small footprints. It allows us to build interactive user interfaces using declarative HTML syntax. If you have worked with Vue.js before, Alpine will feel familiar, but without the overhead, build tools, or complexity of a large framework. Think of Alpine JS as a lightweight layer of interactivity on the top of your HTML. Here are the core features of Alpine JS. The first one is lightweight. Alpine JS is extremely small in size. This makes it perfect for projects where performance and fast loading time matter. No bundler required. No npm install required. The second thing is its declarative syntax. Alpine JS allows us to bind data and behavior directly inside our HTML using attributes. So let's take an example here. I'm going to create a div here, and inside this div we can add our Alpine JS code just like this. So we will deep dive into what xdata is and what is inside here in the curly braces. So here you don't separate logic into large JS file. Everything is readable inside the markup. So the third core feature is no virtual DOM. Unlike frameworks like React, Alpine does not use a virtual DOM. This means less complexity, faster execution, and less abstraction. Alpine JS works directly with the real DOM. Alpine is perfect when you need a small amount of JavaScript. For example, creating drop-down menus, models, tabs, dynamic form validation, and reactive UI on static sites. If you don't need a full SPA framework, Alpine gives you power without complexity. Because you get a lot of power at very small size, no build tools, no complex configuration, just include the CDN and start building. All this makes it perfect for Laravel projects, WordPress, Shopify theme development, and static HTML website. Now let's build something practical. So we are going to create a simple quantity increment and decrement module like you see on e-commerce product pages. So it will have a minus button, a plus button, a quantity display, and prevent going below 0. So as you can see, I have this HTML, and here is the output of this HTML. Here for this tutorial, for designing purpose, I'm using Tailwind CSS. This is optional. You can use any of the CSS framework like Bootstrap, and you can also create your own utility classes and use those classes here. So you can see this is my quantity module. So it is wrapped in this quantity class. I have two buttons, increment and decrement, and I have a span tag. Here I'm going to display the quantity. Now let me add JavaScript code here like this. So here you can see I have some variable and targeted DOM element with the ID, and this is my logic to create increment and decrement functionality. So if we see here, you can see in the browser, I can easily increment and decrement this counter. Now here, idea is to replace this piece of code with Alpine Js. So let's do that. So now let's add our Alpine Js code here. For that, first of all, we need Alpine Js CDN. So we can go here in the alpinejs.dev website and click on this Get Started button, and you can copy the CDN from here. Okay, let me copy this and paste that here like this, and now we can add our Alpine JS code here. So we add our Alpine JS code using xData directive, and here we can create different states. Let's create a count state here, and initial value of this state would be 0. So we will understand what are directive and what is xData directive in the upcoming video. Okay, so for now, let's use this state here. Okay, so we can use one more directive here. Let's say x text, and we can add our state here. Okay, so when we are using x text, there is no need to add a 0 here. Okay, so let me save this, and you can see in the code I have this state value in this span tag. Now let's add increment and decrement functionality here. First of all, let's work on this decrement functionality. So here we can add a click event, and in this click event we can first of all check if count is greater than 0. Only then we can perform count minus minus. So this is all what we need here. Okay, so for the increment, we can create a click event here and add count plus plus. Okay, so now let's refresh the page and try this here. You can see we have created this functionality using Alpine JS, and you can see we have the minimal code here. Just I think 3 or 4 lines of code, and with the JavaScript we have this much of code. Alpine JS clearly wins here. So in a small interactive components like this, Alpine JS reduces the boilerplate. Alpine JS improves the readability, and Alpine keeps logic close to the markup, and Alpine JS automatically handles reactivity. So if you need just a few interactive elements, Alpine JS is much cleaner. Now let's understand one of the most important concepts in Alpine JS, directives. So directives are special HTML attributes provided by Alpine. They always start with X minus symbol. So in other words, directives are special attribute that we add to our HTML tag. They tell Alpine what to do with the specific part of the page, like showing a button, hiding a menu, or updating the text when you click something. So in simple language, think of directives as instructions you give to the computer. So every directive in Alpine JS start with the x minus symbol. So in Alpine JS we have many directives. So here are the common one. Directives allow us to create interactive websites without writing long, complicated files of JavaScript code. Directive allow us to define data, manipulate data, present data, react to events, and control visibility. So we will use directives more than anything else in Alpine. So mastering them is critical. So now we are going to focus on one of the most important directive in Alpine JS, xData. Everything in Alpine starts with xData. If you understand xData deeply, Alpine becomes extremely simple. So xData is a foundation of every Alpine JS component. It defines a block of HTML as a reactive component and provide its initial state and behavior. So let's create xData directive in our code. So here in this div, I am going to use xData directive and create some states here. So let's say I'm going to create my first state, which is count, and initialize it to 0. So the initial value of the state is 0. Here I can create multiple states. Let's say open and make it false like this, and let's say name and let's make it John Doe. So whenever we add xData to an element, Alpine creates an isolated scope. So what do I mean by that? So if I create one more div here, and this div also has some states, let's say it has count state, and let me change this value to 100 and open to true. So these two Alpine components do not affect each other. Each xData block has its own independent states, and this is called a component encapsulation. That's powerful because it prevents states conflicts. So you can create multiple components with the same state, and each component has its own copy of those states. Xdata is not limited to just variable. We can also define methods here. Okay, let me remove these two states here. Let's work with the count state. Let's create two methods here. Let's say increment. So here the code would be to increment the count. So when we are using method inside the x data, so I misspelled here. Let me make it correct. It should be x data. Let me do the same here. Now, so when we are creating a method here and use the state inside this method, we need to use this dot state name and use whatever operation you would like to perform on this state. Here I'm going to increment this by 1. So this is how we can access this state inside this method. Let's create one more method here, which is decrement. So this will decrement the count by 1, and we can also add a condition here to decrement this only if the count is greater than 0, like this. So this is how we can define methods here. So when we are using these method here, this keep the logic clean, and when we are going to access the state, we need to use this keyword. So let's recap what we did. So xData define a reactive component. It creates isolated scope. It stores states and methods. It powers Alpine's reactivity. And everything starts with xData directive. If you understand xData, you understand Alpine. Now we have xText and xHTML directives. They both used to safely insert text and HTML into an element. They may look similar, but they behave very differently. Let's discuss that. So this xText actually is used to insert text into an element. It replaces the element's text content with a value from our state. So in the xData directive, let's create some states. Let's say title, and if I say product title, and we can create one more state here. Let's say description. If I say this is the product description, and let me add strong tag here. Okay, so to display these two states, we will use xText or HTML directives. So let's create a p tag here, and here we can use xText and add our state here. Let's say title. So if we save this, you can see we have a product title text here. Now if we try to display description with the xText directive, now you will see we have some strange behavior here. So let me add state here. Now if I save here, you can see we have HTML here. To resolve this, we will use xHTML. So if we have some HTML tags in the paragraph or in a text, then we will use this xHTML directives. Now what does this xText do? So if we are using xText, then it reads our state, let's say title, and it inserts it as a plain text. The other thing xData can do is if we update the state, the DOM update automatically. Let's say I'm gonna change the title here. Let's say product title 1. If I save this, it automatically update the DOM. On the other hand, if we are using xHTML, it inserts the raw HTML into the element. xHTML does not escape HTML. It renders the content as real HTML. It behaves like inner HTML in JavaScript. Use xText when you render usernames, numbers, label, messages, and any plain dynamic content. On the other hand, use xHTML when rendering CMS content, rendering formatted description, rendering Trust API HTML, and rendering pre-sanitized text. Now we are going to discuss and compare two very important directives, xShow and xIf. They both control visibility, but they behave very differently. If you choose the wrong one, it can affect performance, state handling, and even user experience. Let's break it down clearly. First of all, we have xShow directive. It is used to toggle visibility of an element. It shows or hide the elements using CSS. So let's demonstrate this. So in the xData directive, I'm going to create a state, let's say open, and initialize it as false. Now to hide or show this div, which is right here, we can use xShow here. So we are going to use xShow and add our state here, which is open. So now if the open state is true, only then this div will be visible on our page. So let's hit save. You can see it is hidden because the value of our open state is false. Now it controls CSS. Basically, if we go to the inspector and check our code, you can see here we are adding xshow, and it adds inline style display none. This div is basically a part of the DOM, but it is hidden using CSS. Now if we change the state to true, then our div will be visible and the inline style is removed. Now we can clearly see here, when open is true, element is visible, and when open is false, Alpine applies display none inline CSS to that div. The element remains in the DOM. xshow does not remove the element from the DOM. It only hides using CSS. Now let's discuss xif. It conditionally renders an element. Instead of hiding it, it completely removes or add the element from the DOM. Let's create HTML for this. Let me copy this piece of code. Basically, I need this div. I'm going to remove this xshow directive from here, and I'm also going to change the background color, let's say BG green. Okay, so now we have these divs here. Let me create one more state here. Let's say open if and make it false. So here, when we use xif, we need to wrap this in the template here, basically. So like this. So we need to wrap this div inside the template. So what exactly template is? So template is a native HTML element designed to hold HTML content that should not be rendered immediately in the DOM. In simple terms, the browser stores the content inside this template but does not display it on the page. This behavior makes template perfect for framework like Alpine because they can control when the content should appear. Or we are going to use xif here, so we can add xif directive and make it and add our state here. Now if we save this, you will see the content is disappeared from the page. If we open the inspect tag, and here you can see in this template we don't have that HTML code here. So this means it completely removes the content from the DOM. And if we change the open if state to true and hit save, we will see the content is available, and now we have open if state is true and we have the content here. The major difference between xif and xshow is xif manipulates the DOM structure, whereas xshow only changes the CSS. Now let's see how the state behaves in these two directives. So let me add some code here. So here you can see I have xData directive that contains two states, open false and count is 0. Then I have a button that toggles the visibility of this div, and in this div I have a button also that increase the count state. Let me hit save and see what exactly that we have. So if I click on this toggle button, you can see I can toggle the visibility of this div. Now if I click on this increase button, you can see the count state is changing. If I again hide it and show it again, you can see that the count remains. The last value of count remains there. This is because the element was never removed from the DOM. Now if we try to perform the same functionality using xif, so let me add the code here. So here I have this parent div and has this open state to false, and And in this templates, I have account state. Okay, if I save this, you can see we have this toggle if button. And when I click on this increase button, the count property increases. If now I hide this div by clicking on this toggle if button and show that div again, the count becomes 0. So when hidden, the component is destroyed and the state is reset. There is one more small difference between xShow and xIf. So let me create a button here. Let me copy this piece of code and use that here. So now I can by clicking on this button, I can control the visibility of this div because we have the same state here. So if I save this, and you can see I can toggle the visibility of this div. Now what we can do here is to add some transition. We can use X transition directive. So what it does is when we toggle the functionality, you can see we have a small transition here. So this X transition cannot be used with xIf. So this is one more difference between xIf and xShow directive. In this video, we are going to learn about one of the most important directive in Alpine JS, XON directive. So this XON directives allows us to listen to browser events and run JavaScript when those events happen. So by the end of this video, we will learn what is XON and how to listen to events, the shortcut syntax, and useful modifier. The XON directive is used to attach event listener to the elements. The syntax of writing XON is we can use XON colon, then we have the event name, and then we have expression. Expression can be anything valid JavaScript code. So the most common events that we will use with button is click event. So we can write like XON colon our event name, and then we can write any valid JavaScript code snippet. Now here is when I click on this click me button, I want to toggle the visibility of this div, which is right here. So here what I can do here is when I click on this click me button, I can change the state of this this open state. So I'm writing open is equal to not open. This means when the open is true, when I click on this button, this make it false. And if the open state is false, when I click on this button, open state becomes true. Okay, now we need to add xShow directive here, and we can add our open state here. Okay, so now if I click on this button, you can see I'm toggling the state of this open state here. We can add shortcut syntax here. We can remove XON colon add and add @ symbol here. So this will work same as XON colon. So there is one more example here. I have a button here. I have a p tag that has X text directive, and we are displaying the count state here. I have declared count state to 0, and now we can add functionality. When we click on this button, we can change our state. So we can add count ++. Now if we click here, you can see we have our count state changing. XON works with all browser events. Some of the common events include click, input, change, submit, key down, key up, mouse enter, and mouse leave. Now if we wish to access the native JavaScript event object from the expression, we can use Alpine's magic property, which is $event. Okay, so how we can use this? So let's say I have a button. Let me add a custom attribute here. Let's say name, and the name would be, let's say, Jack. And if I say, let me add the label here, click me to get name, something like this. And now what we can do is, when we click on the button, I'm going to use JavaScript alert method here, and here I will try to fetch the name attribute here. So we can do that using Alpine Js magic property event. So what we can do here is we can add event property. It's a magic property, or you can say it's also, you can also name it as an event variable. Now if we save this and try to run this code, you will see we have an object here in the alert pop-up. Now what we can do here is we can use target and use get attribute and pass name here. Now if we save this and run this code and click on this button again, you can see we can get this custom attribute using Alpine Js magic property event. Now let's see how we can add change event. So I have a select option. You can see we have a few options. So what I'm trying to do is I'm going to display the value of this option inside the console. So how we can do that? We can add change event here, and we can use console.log, and we can use event magic property like this, and we can use target and get the value from here like this. Now let me hit save and let me change something from here. You can see we can get the selected value using change event. Let's work with the input type text and try to add some events there. Okay, so let me create an input with the type text, and let's add placeholder and use, let's say, type something like this. And let me add some classes. Let's say border w full and p2 and empty, let's say 4. So now you can see I have this input type text. Now what I want is I want to display the last pressed key inside a p tag. Let me create that p tag. Okay, so in the X data, I have created two more states, last key and content. So we are going to use two different events here. So first here, I'm going to use a key up event. So here, when I press any key, so we can use last key state like this and change this to, I'm going to use event property here and add key here. So here in the p tag, let's use X text and add our last key state here. Let me save this, and now if I press here, you can see it gives me the last key pressed in this input type text. So now let's check one more event. Let me copy this piece of code and remove this piece of code from the input type text, and let me add that here. You can see here I have created the content state here. So I'm going to show the content here. So the idea is whatever I type in this input type text, I want to show that here in this p tag. So for that, I'm going to use input event and change the content state to event, target and value. So let me hit save, and if I type anything, you can see it is displaying in this p tag. So like this, we can add different events here in this in input type text fields also. Alpine Js also provide many modifier that we can attach to the event. So modifiers allow us to change the behavior of the event. Alpine Js provide many modifier that we can use with the events. The first modifier that we are going to use is prevent. So in normal JavaScript, we write, let's say, e.prevent default, something like this. But if we are using Alpine, we can use .prevent only. So how this can be used? So let me create a function here inside our xData directive. Let's say form submitted. Here I can use, let's say, alert and form submitted. Now what we can do here is we can create a form here. So let me copy the form from the code and paste that here. Instead of this submit form, we can use our function that we created in our xData directive and pass that here. So let me add a class here. Let's say border. Now here we will use the event, which is submit, and we will use this prevent. So whenever we click on this submit button, the form is submitted and page is reloaded. And when we are using prevent, it stops the browser from reloading the page, and we will run this function. Okay, now if I click on this submit button, you can see we have our function called here. The next commonly used modifier is outside. The outside modifiers trigger an event when a click happens outside the element. So this is extremely useful when we are working with the drop downs or pop-ups. So let's demonstrate this inside with this HTML that we have. So now what we can do here is when we click on this this click me button, and the visibility of this this div is toggled. So we can slightly modify the functionality of this button. So instead of toggling, we can make it true. Okay, so if we click that, and we can change the initial state to false so that this div will be hidden. So when we click here, so this will make this div visible. No, we don't have the toggle functionality. So what we can do here is, here in this div, we can use click event and add outside modifier like this. And when we click on the outside of this div, what we can do is we can make open state to false. Okay, let me hit save, and if I click here, you can see and the element is visible. If I click anywhere else, you can see this div becomes hidden. Okay, so this is how we can use outside modifier. We can also add modifiers to input type text also. The one of the most commonly used modifier is debounce. We can modify the functionality of this this input type text. So what we are doing here is when we type anything in this, we can instantly display the state here in this p tag. So what we can do is we can use debounce like this. What will happen is when we stop typing, it will wait for some time and then display this text. Let's say this. So it stops for some time and then display the text. We can again modify by adding, let's say, 500 millisecond. Now if we save this, now if I press this, it will wait for some time and then display the output. It is very useful when we are fetching data from external API or from database with the Ajax. We can also use keyboard events with the input type text. Like with this, we can add enter, and when we press enter on this key on this input type text, we are going to call our form submitted method that we declared in xData directive like this. Now if we hit save, now if I click here, so this input type text is in focus now. When I press enter here, the form is submitted. So like this, you can use events and events modifier.